And there are some questions for the audience that perhaps we can explore together. Perhaps Alejandra, you can say something. One of the questions is about who are the representatives of the Zapatistas. Perhaps the Zapatistas will not use the word representative because we are not in any form of representative democracy. But we can talk a little about the 421 group and then later about the group that will come even with your organization, the National Indigenous Congress, later. Can you say a little about that, Alejandra?
As you say, this group that has crossed the ocean, the 421 squadron that refers to diversity, I feel that it's a demonstration of how the Zapatistas show their way of organizing themselves and see life through diversity. The members are Zapatistas that live in the Caracoles. They are very young. There are four sisters, comrades, and two men, and one other person. And in this exercise of thinking ourselves beyond genders, being men and women that have been imposed on us, and of seeing diversity, this is what the Zapatistas are inviting us to do. And this squadron sailed on the boat La Montaña from the Mayan Peninsula, and they went all the way to Vigo in Spain. And in the next few days, by plane, there will be a delegation of comrades from the CNI, the National Indigenous Congress, because maybe you know this, but I will talk a little bit about this. In 1996, after the call of the Zapatista army, we created what is called the National Indigenous Congress, which is formed by the different people who inhabit this territory called Mexico. And we met in assembly when we were together, and each of us in our territories. And this way of organizing ourselves allowed us to meet with each other as original people and helped us resist and developing our links as people. And in the next few days, there will be a delegation of from the CNI, this Indigenous National Congress. We have a governance body which is made up of one comrade man and one comrade woman from each of our communities, and they will participate. A delegation of them will participate in this caravan for their life. Also, this is something that is important, that on the other side of the ocean, we will meet with the sisters and brothers who consider themselves Zapatista, as Elena said, who are brown hearts who inhabit that territory. And from here, we will look to meeting with each other and to share our struggles. Our struggle is their struggle and your struggle, and we will be able to have a friendly meeting in order to develop the other worlds that we wish.
Muchas gracias, Alejandra. De eso se trata. It is very clear that that is exactly what we are trying to do. The question, another question, even the same question, was basically asking if after the wonderful encountering, there will be any future concrete collaboration. I would like to say about that in 2006, when the Zapatistas produced a very, very important declaration, the sixth declaration, that is critical to understand the new phase of the Zapatista struggle. In that moment, they also created the sixth outside. And then there was a way to unite all the different movements. It's not to look for future collaboration. The collaboration is already there. There is a collaboration with many groups in many different parts. When Alejandra and was mentioned, and also we discussed how 5,000 groups are connected with the Zapatistas for this specific tour. We are talking about something that was not born today. It is many years of collaboration, strengthening the relation between us, and created a very specific force that does not have the usual shape. It is not a party, it's not a closed organization. It is exactly what Alejandra just said. We are an assembly when we are together, we are a web when we are separated. This is what we are doing today. Yes, one of the questions that we got is that if the will the Zapatistas be able to help the Europe from below to better organize the resistance. I don't know if the Zapatistas will use the expression to help others. They are not trying to help anyone in the same way that they are not accepting help. There is a very important collaboration. There is a very important horizontal collaboration in which we learn from each other and we create strong ties with each other without someone teaching the other what to do or what not to do. We have a new kind of resistance, a new kind of organization, a very horizontal organization. And there is also a very interesting question from Qin Chi Lao. That Qin Chi Lao is sharing with us the questions from the audience in China. Uh, what are some of the practical proposals of the Zapatistas for communities from below to take to dismantle the capitalist system? How not to participate in the capitalist system? Another question is, I agree with the spirit of rise up, um, awake, etc. But those who should who sound rather vague, apart from brotherhood and statehood, what can the Zapatistas and the European movements do together? I don't know, Alejandra, if you can explore a little about these two different questions. How we are dismantling the capitalist system, how we are creating a new world beyond the capitalist system, and how we can collaborate between the Zapatistas and our groups and the people in Europe.
I will try to answer the three questions. To start out, as the Zapatistas have said, we all have a lot of questions. This voyage is and the visit involves a lot of questions. But beyond these questions, there is something that the Zapatistas are inviting us, and they have demonstrated this in the 6 months when they were preparing this travel for life. They talked about joy. The communiques of the Zapatista always are full of joy and of challenging the system with new words, new ways of seeing the world and describing it from based on what comes from the grassroots. With a small boat, they are crossing the ocean to meet these other people. And this is what they are inviting us to do in our own territories, in our own time, that we imagine our own circumstances based on the problems that we have in our territories, how we will resolve them, and not just do this in an isolated fashion, but rather do it collectively, all together. And this is what the Zapatistas have always proposed, that we meet the others. They did this 13 years ago. They met with brothers and sisters and organized ourselves. How do we organize ourselves, those at the grassroots level. How can we get out of this system or go beyond the system? I think that the Zapatistas are giving us examples. Autonomy is certainly one of the big answers and one of the big paths to confront these difficulties. After they took up the arms and then left these arms, they put them aside in humility. They have been developing autonomy. And I think that today, these alternatives presents us with different roads, different paths that we can follow, because we can have autonomy in our territories, but also autonomy that can be developed with others that are elsewhere. Imagine this world with this autonomy is a great way of getting out of this capitalist system. When we stop consuming, when we start think about how we can eat and inhabit our environment and heal and learn outside of the system, I think is a way of making a lot of progress. So there are many, many solutions, alternatives. And so there are many things that we can do with the Zapatistas. And to be here is doing things together with the Zapatistas, to listen to the words of the Zapatistas and of those who feel that they are part of Zapatismo is another way of doing things together. When we listen at the other with an intention of being impacted by them, moved by them, we are changing ourselves. We can ceasing to being part of the hegemonic territory and being part of them. And this voyage for life will open up a lot of roads, not just in Europe, but everywhere in the world. After this project, there will be many others that will be done with our hearts in a decided way, not just by the Zapatistas, but everyone who resists this system from the grassroots will want to act also. So this is something from inside that tells us that the system is destroying us, but also our brothers and sisters, and also nature. And a lot of us need to listen to these voices that for life, that are fighting for life, and we can participate in this struggle also.
Alejandra, it has been really very, very interesting and very strong statement about these relations between the Zapatistas and many other movements. I would like to say that it is the continuation of very close collaboration and interaction. In 2006, the Zapatistas produced the Sixth Declaration of Selva Lacandona. That is a very, very important document. I think that we need to come back to that document time and again. It's a plan of action with the very solid reflections after many years of the struggle and thinking of the Zapatistas. And in that time, in 2006, the Sixth International was created. That was a network that was a really very, very interesting and fascinating connection between all the different groups around the world that were calling themselves Zapatistas, were interested in the Zapatista struggles, and were organizing at the local level many different ways of struggling against the Hydra, against the capitalism, against patriarchy, against the dominant system. We were clearly trying to work together with many other groups and movements around the world. And perhaps, Elena, you can comment a little about something that comes in a question from the Chinese audience. Let me say just before that another question mentioned that on June 28th, there was a discussion in this forum about the role of traditional medicine during the pandemic. And the question is if the Zapatista communities use traditional medicine or herbal in fighting COVID-19. I would say immediately that yes, they are using this, that they have been really very well organized. They closed themselves when they got the information, and they organizing themselves. And if you see the number of cases and the number of deaths are clearly below all national or international standard. They have been using their own traditions, their own ways, their own organization deal with this specific virus. And I would say that they have also inspired many communities in Mexico, many indigenous communities that have done something similar. And they are using healing practices. You have still many communities in Oaxaca, for example, where I live, that have not one single case of infection, or that have some infections and no deaths, meaning that they are using traditions of organizations and healing more effective than Western medicine or the kind of rules by the government. But there is another question, that is the questions that perhaps Elena can comment a little about how we will collaborate in the future. Yes, we have collaboration already, but how we will collaborate in the future between groups in Europe, movements in Europe, and groups in Mexico and other parts of the world. Of course, also with the Zapatistas. Do you want to comment a little about the future collaboration between movements and organizations?
Yes, thank you for the incredible large number and interest of this question. Of course, I think that nobody knows exactly what we wanna do, what we will do together after these tours. We are constructing day by day our network and our connection, and I think that usually projects, collaboration are not something that we can plan before struggles, but as our relationship, also our plans are something that are always spreading and spreading by walking in the struggle processes, because struggles are that make us brother and sister. But we are sure that if now we, thanks to this tour, we know better each other, we will be ready to sustain. We will be ready to help each other in front of any enemies and any risks. I want to add that, of course, that Zapatista tour will help us to organize better in Europe. I already mentioned the impressionant number of assembly and of events of action that are rising after the pandemic period, particularly thanks to the tour. But I think that they are helping us to organize also in a more deep sense. For example, they invite us to change a little bit the paradigm in which we are used to think our struggle, our ideas of alternative. For example, talking about ecology, no? Many times in Europe we are used to defend nature because otherwise we humans could not survive. We do it from an utilitarian and binary perspective, risen from a philosophy and a cosmology born and developed in the last 2050 years of Western history. That is the same cosmology which led to the imposition of man over nature, of men over women, of the myth of progress. And we are sons and daughters of this paradigm, contaminating ourselves with other eyes can make our alternative model stronger and expand our imagination possibilities. The Zapatista tour is an incredible opportunity to transform this paradigm and to think better, to organize better the transformation we want. What does it mean that ecology is primarily a defense of a territory? What does it mean that feminism and self-determination could be communitarian feminist determination? What means that the colonization process go through the affirmation of autonomy? I think that these are really, really important toolbox that Zapatista tour could help in mutually refining, to say this in simple words. And yes, I think that I'm agree with Alejandra, and they told really clear that Zapatism is not a new answer to the many problems we have in our little world, but Zapatism is questions. And the most important of these questions is, and you what? It's a call, no? To watch, to ourselves and to organize. They are not teaching us nothing, but yes, ideas as autonomy, ideas as self-subsistence are ideas really, really contagious. And I think that it will be really useful to be contagious from this kind of word. I want only add that, for example, living out of capitalism, no? Like someone is asking, is something really, really difficult, particularly in Milan, the heart of financial capitalism in Italy. But we really want to know, to ask to our comrades, to our Zapatistas comrades, what concretely means autonomy in a territorial, but also in a community organization sense, starting from retaking a lot of knowledge. We are more similar than we are used to think. For example, in the transition from medieval age to capitalism, in the same period of the genocide of people and knowledge in Latin America, another genocide occurred in Europe against women, against medical knowledge, against the possibility to take care of life using through plants, for example, through nature. And talking about pandemic in Europe, we are now completely used to think that the only medicine is the allopatha medicine. But now we discovered, thanks or not thanks to the pandemic, that we are not able to take care of ourselves. And we discovered it through the collapse of the public health system during the pandemic. So what can we learn? How could we be contagious by Zapatist ideas of autonomy? For example, discovering the incredible importance of autonomous knowledge. I'm sure that these toolbox will be something that will keep and something that will be really, really useful for us, really helpful for us, and something that I hope we will be able to exchange.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Elena, for these reflections. I would like to address now some of the questions by the audience. One question was, what happened, which are the relations between the Zapatistas and the progressive government of the current president of Mexico? I would say briefly something. The current president is talking about the fourth transformation, alluding to the three previous great transformations of Mexico, through the struggle for independence at the beginning of the 19th century, through the reform by mid-19th century, through the revolution 100 years ago. The three first transformations were a disaster for indigenous people, a real disaster. We cannot discuss exactly how, but they were a disaster. They created a lot of problems. They were dispossessed, they were marginalized, they were excluded. There was a combination of genocide and culturicide. The fourth transformation of López Obrador follows that tradition. The indigenous peoples, the indigenous areas have been constantly attacked during this regime, and they are clearly dismissed. And even one of the directors, so the director of Tren Maya, one of the mega projects, explicitly used the word genocide, saying that these people should be eliminated for their improvement, transformed in something else. They are still using that kind of mentality to destroy, to de-Indianize the Indians for their betterment. The tension is permanent. We don't see how we will be able to stop Tren Maya, to stop the transseismic corridor in the Isthmus, but I am sure that we will keep the resistance and we will protect our territories from all this tragic development imposed by the current government. Yes, we are fighting together with the Zapatistas to stop it, and they are advancing in a very oppressive way, using the army and the police and even shock groups to attack the Zapatistas and the group rebelling against that. Yes, we have been working in something that can be described as a regime change. We are, in a very real sense, discussing that we are at the end of an era, and the new world has been already born. And one way to see it is how they are doing this in the Zapatista area, in the Zapatista zone, how they have created autonomy. One of the questions, as Elena already commented, is how to do this in the modern setting, in the urban setting, in Milan, for example, how to organize autonomy. Well, yes, we know it is pretty difficult. You can think that it is easier in Selva Lacandona, in the rural communities of Chiapas. It was extremely difficult. It's not easy to create autonomy in any place on earth. In the case of an isolated rural community, it poses different kind of problems, but the oppression of capitalism is felt there, like in New York or Paris. Yes, one way of talking about what we can do is abandoning nouns that create dependency and using verbs that give us back our agency. If we use the word education, we immediately depend on someone that will educate us, a public or private institution that will provide us the service of education. If we talk about learning, we are the ones that are learning. And we do this about eating, about settling, about healing, instead of talking about health or housing. That is one way of expressing what we can do to liberate ourselves from the oppression of the system, how we create autonomy in New York, Paris, Milan, or any urban center of the modern society in the global north, we can take us back to our good verbs, to our agency, how we can heal abandoning the dependence of the health system, how we can eat without agribusiness and without the dependence of a market that is sickening and killing us with toxic food, how we can reconstruct our lives. And one very important way is to abandon the consumption of many communities that we don't need and that are sickening us and destroying us in a very effective way. But perhaps this is the time to invite our beloved friend Ashish to react to what we have been discussing during the last 1 hour and a half. Ashish, we really would love to listen to what you have to say about our experience, about the visit of the Zapatistas to Europe, that perhaps one of these days they will also arrive in India.
Thank you, Gustavo. Yes, indeed. There are two visits that I'm waiting very eagerly for. One is the Zapatista coming here, and the second is my revisiting you in Oaxaca. Hopefully, both will happen soon. This has been a wonderful exchange. I think I have been listening with full attention to Elena and Alejandra and you. And I mean, I thought, having spoken to you and a bit to Alejandra before, that I kind of knew a lot of things, but I learned today that I had to, that there were lots of new things that I'm still learning. And that's always a wonderful part of these sorts of exchanges. I think 3 or 4 reflections from our side, from South Asia, on the Zapatista and this current tour. One is, and it's very clear from the way in which both Alejandra and Elena and you, Gustavo, is one thing the Zapatista have done very well and have therefore also enabled us to do, is to demolish the myth of TINA, that is, there is no alternative. That's a myth that was created, well, it was made famous by Margaret Thatcher, but it's a myth that we have all been, we've all grown up with. I remember in school when we were asking questions about environmental destruction and development and so on, we were always told, yeah, there's some ecological damage, but there is no alternative. This is the only path we have. And it seems to me that movements like Zapatista or the Kurdish Rojava women's movement and others give us precisely the counter to that kind of myth that the system gives us. And I think this happens in sort of 2 or 3 most critical ways. One is the challenge to liberal forms of democracy. So it's not just a challenge to military or authoritarian governments and things like that, but also the liberal election-based form of democracy, what probably actually should not be called democracy anyway. But it seems to me that what the Zapatistas provided us is, at a large scale, an alternative which is direct radical governance, autonomy, radical democracy, what here in India we would call Swaraj, or self-rule and self-determination. And Gustavo, I think one of my dreams, never to come true, of course, is a sort of a conversation between Mahatma Gandhi and the Zapatista and the Kurdish Rojava women. It would be amazing, because in a way, what Gandhi also said, the state is the enemy of the people, was a form of anarchy in the good sense, and radical direct democracy. He talked about village republics. And it seems to me that this is one thing that Zapatistas have said is not just a theory, but a practice on the ground, which is enormously inspiring. The second one, I think, is also about how we can live an economy without both the state and corporations. the localization and the democratization of the economy, and then the reinvention of the economy as being one not of money so much, but of relationships of caring and sharing. And from what I know and from what I've heard, especially what Alejandra said, it seems that that is exactly what is being attempted there. That how do you, money might still be there, but it is one of the least important parts of the economic life of the communities in the Zapatista area. And so how do we re-examine economic systems based on that kind of sovereignty, the sovereignty of food, the sovereignty of energy, the sovereignty of housing, the sovereignty of water in the community, not with the nation state. And I think both of these things also help us to challenge, and I think it was either Elena or Alejandra who said this, that even the concepts, and this is a question I'm going to be asking Elena also in a minute, is challenging the concept of the nation state itself and the boundaries. I don't know so much about Europe, but certainly in South Asia, and I know from what I know of Africa, is that in the colonial period and post-colonial period, the ways in which nation-state boundaries have been made are completely disrespectful of ecosystems and of cultures. And again, I think what the Zapatista, and even more so probably the Kurdish Rojava, because they're that's a region in the middle of 4 so-called nation-state countries, have shown us is that you don't need that. You don't need those boundaries. In fact, one has to start demolishing those boundaries in order to be really equitable, just, and sustainable. So another aspect to this, and I love the conversation about the challenge to names, the renaming of things. So the renaming of Europe, that's amazing. It's exciting. And I think the more we're able to actually do this, the more we're able to help young people across the world decolonize their minds. One of the things I like best and use a lot is the map of the world where Africa is on top and Europe is at the bottom, right? And when I use that map, people say, why is it upside down? And you get into this conversation that the so-called normal right side up map is a colonial map, and Europe was put on top, and Europe was made much bigger to look much bigger than it actually is. Now, this project of decolonization, which the Zapatistas have been so fantastic at, just in terms of the slogans, the names, the labels, etc., is something we need to spread all over the world. Because as somebody said, it's not just about other countries colonizing us, but we also have internal colonization. In India, for instance, a lot of names of places have been indigenous names or local community names have been displaced, and mainstream names have been put into place. And now it's getting even worse when Hindu names are being imposed on Muslim names, etc., etc. So you see this internal colonization also taking place. So I think the thing of reclaiming nomenclature is, as somebody said, not just symbolic, but also a very important part of the resistance and the alternatives. So the cultural and knowledge diversity part of it. I don't know how the Zapatista deal with language. That could be a question one of you can respond to. But for instance, here again, one of the biggest problems is that there's only a few languages which are considered to be constitutionally valid and which are taught in schools. But India has 800 different languages. And when you do this kind of mainstreaming, you're losing enormous amounts of language and the knowledge that goes with it. So again, I think we learn from movements like the Zapatista that has to be resisted, and that we need to assert our own cultural identities, our own languages, our own food systems, our own ways of being, ways of doing, ways of thinking, ways of dreaming. Yeah. Maybe just one last comment, and then I have a couple of questions which I'd like to place also especially to Alejandra and Elena and you, Gustavo. I think one of the things that ties us together, and all three of you have also kind of hinted at this, is not, people, when I give this example of, say, the Zapatista or Kurdish, or many of the examples from India of radical democracy and localization and so on, people say, how do you replicate this? Or how do you upscale it? And our response has always been that both of these are wrong approaches. The approach is learning the lessons, learning the values and the ethics, and then saying, okay, how do we apply it in our context? And I think we need to explicitly express these ethics and values and principles much more. The Zapatistas have always been doing this, but in so many other parts of the world, in the movements, it's not just about how we did something, but why we did something. What are the what are the expressions of solidarity, of love, of autonomy, of diversity, of generosity, and this has especially become so important in the COVID pandemic, right? That even as governments and corporations are using the opportunity to do what they've always done, become more authoritarian and profit-making, people around the world have expressed solidarity. They've gone out of their way to help people in need. And I think this is really what we need to pick up. What are those sorts of ethics and principles which are so opposed to what the currently dominant system tells us? The dominant system says selfishness, individualism, private property, etc., etc. Whereas what the Zapatista and these other movements are saying is community, collaboration, generosity, commons, etc. And I really think we need processes around the world of trying to articulate those and what they mean in different contexts and in different moments, and what are the, within the differences, what are the commonalities? Because that's what then brings us to the famous slogan of a world in which many worlds fit. Because if there are many worlds, and there's lots of diversity and difference, and that's fantastic, it has to be there. What are the common threads amongst all these different moments, which we can keep building on to create a very different tapestry around the world? Let me just maybe pose a couple of, not questions so much, but maybe sort of dilemmas that I think many movements around the world have. And I'd love to hear from the three of you on this. One is the relationship with the state. Now, we know that the Zapatistas have claimed autonomy. They have probably very little relationship with the state except a relationship of tension. But they also were involved with setting up or putting up an indigenous candidate for the national elections, if I'm not mistaken, which created confusion. And Gustavo, I remember I wrote to you and you had clarified it for me, but I think for the audience, it might be useful to understand why that happened, how that happened, and what is, even for, let's say, Alejandra, for the Indigenous, the National Indigenous Congress, what is the relationship? Because you have a state, you do have a state, you need to have, you can assert autonomy, but most communities still have some dealings or some way, something to do with it. So what is that relationship which you think could help us not get co-opted and continue the fight towards revolution and autonomy, but yet create more spaces that we need right now, etc. So that's one thing. The second one is, Alejandra, you mentioned green capitalism. It goes by different name, green growth, green capitalism, green economy, even sustainable development. All nice greenwashing of the current system. How do we, the problem is it's very seductive. People get really attracted by this kind of thing. $1 billion is going into green economy, right? From some corporation or some philanthropy institution. Jeff Bezos has just put $1 billion into climate, etc. While Amazon corporation does everything, all the destruction. But how do we convey to people that these are really, these are not really the solutions? I think, to me, this, and this is linked to also consumption and consumerism, because all of us in some way or the other are caught up with it, because we've grown up with these advertisements that this is what's good for me, etc. So this is another thing. Again, how do the Zapatistas deal with? If the young people, for instance, want all the consumer goods of the world, because they must be surely seeing it on their phones and their television and so on, how do the Zapatistas deal with it? Because this is a question a lot of alternative movements around the world are asking, that we've done something fantastic, but our younger generation is saying, oh, I want this and I want that. And there's no way a local economy can create the money that would be able to buy all of that. And in any case, buying all of that means just being part of the same capitalist system, even as you fight for autonomy at the local level. So maybe if either of you has, or any of you has some responses to that, it would be fantastic for all of us to learn from. But let me end by just again expressing my gratitude to all three of you, and of course to Kinchi and Zitsui for this, for enabling this conversation. I wish it could go on for a couple of hours more because there's so much more to learn. But it's a beginning, and I'm sure we'll have many more such exchanges. And all the best, Elena. When you do meet the Zapatista, please tell them we have a very, 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 very warm and very large-hearted welcome to them to come to South Asia. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ashish. I think it was a very, very enriching perception and participation of the meaning of this Zapatista tour to Europe, and hopefully to India one of these days. And hopefully we will be able to host you in Oaxaca one of these days. Before giving the floor first to Elena and then to Alejandra for the final statements in this session, I would like to comment a few questions. First, a few questions addressed to me in the chat. One very briefly, it's a very complex question, but that would like just to say in a sentence. It question was mentioned that instead there is a positive aspect of ethnocide because we have ethno development. We will say with Ashish and many others that ethno development is another form of ethnocides, that there is no difference. It is a kind of ethnocides, and perhaps it's the worst kind of ethnocides that we have ever known. Yes, that they are killing people and they are destroying everything that we are. We are trying to avoid the use of development in any possible sense or any possible meaning. And the second questions ask what is the meaning of grassroots postmodernism as the title of one of my books. I must say immediately that that was not my title of the book. That was a title that the publisher assumed it was good for the book. And if you read the book, you will see that I am not talking about grassroots postmodernism. I am talking about grassroots initiatives. And postmodernism is a very ambivalent word that has many different meanings today. And for some people, it's just what is after modernism, after the modern era. For other people, that is perhaps the most interesting aspect is just how the modern people are puzzled because they know that the main principles and the main ideas of the modern era are dead, are exhausted, but they don't know what to do. They have not been able to create an alternative to those ideas of the modern era. And that is one way of talking about postmodernism. But the book is really addressing the grassroots initiatives. What is the world at the grassroots? How we behave, how we do things, how we practice things that are clearly an alternative to the modern era. Now, I would like to address some of the themes addressed by Ashish. One is very important for me. He mentioned Gandhi. And apparently there is a great contradiction between an army and Gandhi, the guy of nonviolence. But there is a very, very important connection between Gandhi and the Zapatista movement. Gandhi, in several occasions, expressed the conviction that nonviolence, the supreme virtue, is for the weak, for the strong, not for the weak. That the weak may be forced to use violence if they are weak and they had no other option. And this applies very well to the Zapatistas. The Zapatistas were the weak and then they used weapons to express they were dying like flies. They were not expecting to win. They were expecting to die, but then that the people after the sacrifice will be shaking and react to the situation of the so-called the people that we call now Zapatistas. And because they became the strong, as I tried to explain, because that they are using nonviolence. And then in a very real sense, for more than 25 years, they have been Gandhians, applying the ideas of Gandhi and the basic inspiration of Gandhi in many of their actions. There is another point raised by Ashish that I would like to comment. It is the question of the nation state. For many of us, the so-called nation state, the political form of capitalism, have already vanished. In 30% of the so-called Mexicans are living today out of Mexico. And we cannot say that the national borders have any meaning for millions of people. Then we are living already beyond the idea of the nation state. And then I think this is a very important theme that we need to discuss. And I think the Zapatistas had made very important contributions for the reflection of what is to live beyond the nation state. I think that these visits around the world will represent an opportunity to discuss exactly that. What is today to live beyond the very idea of the nation state? But Ashish is always right, because we have still bureaucratic apparatuses, and we are not creating autonomy in Mars. We are creating autonomy here in this world. And in this world, we have all the time interventions by different bureaucratic apparatuses in the name of the state, in the name of the government. Well, for many of us, we are treating that kind of interventions as obstacles. Perhaps the most important change is that we are not putting our hope in the state, in a kind of leader up there, in someone, in a kind of movement or whatever up there that will save us and protect us and give us solutions. We are thinking all the time in our own capacity at the grassroots. And then we treat all these negotiations that we are forced to have with the state as obstacles and limitations. In the same way that in dealing with nature, we have some limitations. There are some things that we cannot do because there are limits in the capacities of nature to do something. In the same way, we can try to deal with the so-called state as an obstacle we need to deal with. And we, in many cases, we don't expend our energy in fighting with these kind of restrictions. I would say the analogy will be in the same way that we accept the rules of the traffic in the city and we stop before a red light, then we can accept that kind of limits to our behavior, to our daily behavior, because of the impositions of the state. But we are spending most of our energy not only in resisting what they do, but also in trying to do something else. Sometimes we are forced to resist and to have a very to orient all our struggle to resist, for example, against the Tren Maya and against the Transismic corridor in Mexico, the mega projects of López Obrador. But that is because a direct aggression in our territory or our culture. But the main struggle is not really there. And this is also connected with another brilliant observation of Ashish, that is the question of scale. That there is always the temptation, yes, that is very beautiful what you are doing in your place, in your locality, but what about the nation? What about the global situation? And we are discussing that the movement that we are talking, and Zapatistas are a very good example, is a localism that is not localists. Yes, they are rooted, they are doing the work in their own place, but at the same time trying to connect with others like them in other parts of the way. When a few years ago, Ashish and I discussed these kind of things, then together with some other friends, we invented that things, the tapestry, the global tapestry of alternatives. a Tapestry is not a global organization with leaders and reproducing the state or global movements. It's not proletarians of the world united. It's not creating again what failed in the 20th century. The Tapestry is another form of relations. We are weaving our alternatives, our resistance with other people like us all around the world, trying to operate in a different, to take the scale in a completely different form. Yes, we need many hours to discuss these kind of things that are fascinating. One of these days we will continue the conversation, I am sure, in different kind of fora, and in which Ashish is clearly a lot more active than myself, that I am not traveling much. Anyway, this is our discussion. Then I would like to ask Elena for a final statement for our session. Anything that you want to comment at the end of our session?
Yes, only two little things. The first one, thanks to one question or better one statement in the chat. Yes, it's really important to highlight that exists network and movement like Fridays for Future, that for sure they are aware. For example, Fridays for Future offshore is aware that climate and environmental change demand system change. It's totally true. My organization, Cantiere, is involved in Fridays for Future, for example, and other networks. But I want to stress the point that I think that is possible because it's always been a global movement which promotes and builds bridge. I think that the tour will be one more bridge, and I think that being aware also means being aware that we need to be contagious, that we need to be always networking with other perspectives, other cosmologies, other way of naming, way of thinking, and other paradigms. We are learning, and in all Europe, that sometimes we better listen to the other. And it's true for Fridays for Future. It's true, luckily, for a lot of different movements. For example, to the feminist, trans feminist movement, we retake ni una menos, ni una más slogan and idea from the Latin America, or for anti-racist movement that are powerfully retaking Black Lives Matter claim from the Black Afro-American people. And this means to be aware that yes, we need definitely a general system change, and that this system change we could create. We only could create this system change together, networking all around the world with different perspective cosmologies and yes, and ideas. No, I wanna only retake one thing about the incredible solidarity which spread all around Europe, and only because I wanna talk about what I know during the pandemic. Talking about Milan, Italy, there is really incredible how many projects to share food, to help for free, not to be alone, to guarantee the housing right are developing. And the most important point, I think that, for example, in the case of the space of mutual aid, but also other projects, we discovered the importance to go beyond solidarity and practice mutual aid. The difference is that we don't think that there is something who have to save some other people. We think that It's better unite, networking to build territories, to construct communities, rebel communities, autonomous communities. But an interesting point is how we can go beyond the emergency time, how we could construct continuity without create powers, without we create bureaucracy, how we can create commons, but not bad copies of the states. And this is one of the open questions we with which we open our hands and our arms to Zapatista tours.
Thanks a lot, Elena. This was a very beautiful way to close your reflection. And now I will ask Alejandra to produce the final statement of this session. Alejandra.
Thank you very much, Gustavo and Kichi, for this invitation to participate in this very rich dialogue. And we could continue several more hours on what the Zapatistas has invited us to. And right off, I would like to say, like Diego La Cantona, they are the insomniacs that the entire history needs. The Zapatistas are allowing us to break down this system piece by piece. We are imagining other worlds. We want to go beyond the market, the economy, and the patriarchy and the state. We have seen that here, this capitalist and patriarchal system is causing a lot of destruction and pain. And we are very much attracted by life, and it's a very beautiful diversity. And the Zapatistas are showing us this possibility of diversity. They don't show us a road. They are inviting us to dream and to invent. And I think that this is the great beauty of Zapatismo. And there's no doubt that we have to recognize, like the Zapatistas have recognized, that we are small, but that our struggles can generate major changes, that these changes start in the small scale. And they talk about the limitations that we have. Today, we have to recognize limitations to this system cannot continue growing based on progress, development, and money. We have to acknowledge the scarcity that is leading us to major crisis. And we have to, they invite us to go back to what we had before in other area in which we had a more harmonious and respectful relation among us, but also with life itself. And that would allow us to live with the basic and at the same time, and as Gustavo said, it would allow us to eat, to live, and to share. And that we have to learn to be happy with the sufficient, what is close to, at hand. And this sometimes is what our brothers, Zapatista brothers and sisters, are inviting us to do. The Zapatistas have taught us, as Gustavo said, to relate and to travel in a world in which the things are not imposed on us. And in that we can also, I like the discussion that we had in our National Indigenous Congress when we had the candidacy of Marie Chui. We saw it as an instrument, as a tool, another tool, like all the other tools that technology and cell phones allow us, not as a solution, or as an exit. And we have many other solutions and possibilities today, including those, as Ashish has said, that they want to impose on us through technology, and which are tempting. And we think that these technologies will save us. No, the salvation isn't there. Salvation is in us, ourselves, and to see each other in this struggle for life. So I thank you very much for this opportunity to talk with all of you, with China, and really this generates a lot of hope for me. That it's wonderful to see the awakening that we can see in many territories. I think that we are in a moment in which humanity is facing the alternative between continuing in this nightmare or to develop with our solidarity and recognizing our diversity, build a new world full of hope. Thank you very much.
Brillante, Alejandra, muy bien. That was it, Kinchi. Thanks a lot for the opportunity. And let's hope that one of these days we will continue the conversation in another one of your brilliant events that you organize all the time. Thanks again for the opportunity. See you pretty soon, I hope, one of these days.
So I'll just come in with some last words. I think it's not as if everybody would say that they are inspired by the Zapatistas. But then when one says that they are inspired by the Zapatistas, I think it is also a recognition of the same kind of alternatives that are pursued in one's own communities. And so the solidarity that we express for the Zapatistas is not that we are trying to teach each other or simply learn from each other. It is also an expression of a recognition of our own strength, of our own courage and love and hope in our own community, in the work that we are doing. And I think it is in this spirit that we also understand what Gustavo has been telling us about friendship, hope, and surprise. And I think sometimes we may be surprised by our own efforts, by the possibilities that we may manage to take up. And so thank you very much again to Gustavo for organizing this dialogue. Thanks to Elena, to Alejandra, to Ashish. And I would also like to thank our interpreters for tonight. We have Sandrine Alongi, Raymond Robitaille, Juan Xiaomei, and also Li Menghong, who have been doing the simultaneous interpreting into Spanish, English, and Chinese.